Welcome to the Decision Analyst Insider Series webinar on the fundamentals of volumetric forecasting. My name is Christy Allen. I am the Marketing Director at Decision Analyst and the moderator today. Before I introduce our presenter, I have a few notes for everyone. In the Downloads section, there's a copy of today's presentation with some relevant case studies and white papers. Also, please feel free to ask questions by typing in the chat box. We will attempt to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. If we don't answer your question during the webinar, someone will respond to your question within a day or two. Today's presenter is Jerry Thomas, President and CEO of Decision Analyst. Jerry has over 30 years of experience in helping companies with their new product development efforts. And with that, I will hand it off to Jerry for the presentation.
Thank you, Christy, and welcome to our webinar today. Special welcome to our European friends in the UK, France, and Germany. And I think we have some early birds on the West Coast in the US as well. So thanks for getting up so early. The topic today is the fundamentals of volumetric forecasting. And this is going to be a high-level conceptual discussion of different forecasting techniques. And what's of interest about these techniques is that the concepts and the ideas can not only be applied to forecasting new products, but they can be applied to almost any type of research study where you're trying to understand the volumetric implications of various marketing decisions. Before we get into the heart of the presentation, a few terms I would like to touch on, just to make sure we're all using the same or we understand the language that I'm using. The term volumetric forecasting comes from predicting sales volumes for new products, hence the term volumetric. We use the term retail depletions, and most often retail depletions is what we are trying to forecast. And what we mean by this term retail depletions is the products that are moving out of the supermarket or out of the Walmart or whatever the store is. So we don't count inventories, products and shipments, products sitting in the back of the warehouse. It's only the products that are moving out of the supermarket. Think of it as scanner sales. Typically, forecasts are based on retail pricing. So if we tell you that a new peanut butter is going to sell at the rate of $10 million a year, we're talking almost always talking about retail prices. So the manufacturer has to discount that number by 30% or 40% or whatever the profit margin is at the retailer to get to a manufacturer's price. So typically when we're forecasting, we're talking about retail pricing. One other term that you'll hear me use in the presentation is I'll cover that a little bit later. So there are really three major presentations or webinars we're going to do this year on forecasting. And today we're going to focus on CPG or consumer packaged goods, the US term. These same product categories are called FMCG or fast-moving consumer goods by our brothers and sisters in Europe. And today, this is going to be the focus of the presentation. And what distinguishes these products is the short purchase cycle. So milk, for example, might be purchased every 7 days. Peanut butter might be purchased every 30 days. The second category, and we'll do this presentation later in the year, are durable goods. And these are long-lasting products such as refrigerators, cars, tractors, machines. And typically, a durable good is defined as one that lasts 3 or more years. And a lot of the forecasting techniques that apply to the CPG world also apply to durable goods, but we have to make modifications in them because we're trying to do something different. And then the last category that we'll do a presentation on this year is sales forecasting for new services. And services are intangibles. They can't be owned. They can't be stored. It's like education and medical services and transportation and so forth. The new product forecasting process really begins with the concept test. And regardless of the product category, the product concept has to be evaluated as a part of the forecasting process. So if it's a durable good, such as a new automobile, the concept test may be conducted in the guise of a product clinic or an auto clinic because the product is very complicated. We really can't present it adequately in the form of a rough print ad. But most consumer goods are comparatively simple, and people are familiar enough with these categories and buy them often enough that we can use a relatively simple form of a rough print ad. And typically that rough print ad you see on the left of the screen under the title, Our New Product, would include the name of the product, a picture of the package, a picture of the product, the way it may appear on a plate or the way it may be served. The concept may include some type of pricing information. So this would be kind of an example of a typical new product concept. The biggest problem in volumetric forecasting and in concept testing in general is that there's tremendous variation from corporation to corporation in the quality and the style of concept execution. So there is no one definition for a new product concept. And that's one of the reasons that normative databases that are owned by various companies that do new product sales forecasting are largely worthless because there's so much variation from company to company in the quality of the concepts and the content of the concepts. So as a part of a new product forecasting system, it's very important to set very precise standards for what a concept is and is to be. For example, and this is not, I'm not recommending this as a best practice, but just simply an example. For example, a standard might be that we always want to show a color photo of the retail package. We may always want to show a photo of the food in the way that it's going to appear on a plate or the way it's going to be served. We have some standard way that we introduce the concept. We have a product description. We give a reason perhaps it's better than competitive products, and we're always going to list 2 or 3 main selling points. And in pricing, our standard may be that we always say it's competitively priced, or we make some other neutral statement about pricing, or maybe we don't include pricing at all initially. The concept test is a fundamental component in forecasting sales of new products. And of course, questions, as you know, can be predictive in nature, or questions can be descriptive or explanatory or diagnostic. The predictive questions that we feel are essential in the questionnaire for forecasting purposes After exposure to the concept would be purchase intent, typically a 5-point purchase intent scale. Which size or what size package the consumer is most likely to buy, how often or how frequently they would purchase that package. We really like to see a question on product uniqueness, because that gives us a sense of how much real competition this product might have out in the marketplace. We always have to get reaction to pricing in a concept test, and a best practice that we recommend is to test the concept, ask about the concept first, unpriced, and then later in the survey get reactions to pricing. We also place a lot of reliance on the replacement or substitution question. That is, if you use this new product, what would you stop using? Because that really helps you understand better who this new product might be competing with, and that can cause you to modify a forecast. There's a raging debate in the world of concept testing and volumetric forecasting about how we do sampling. And the question essentially is, should you always test your concepts among a nationally representative sample so that the sample is always identical from concept to concept, or should you always test your new product concepts among category users, that is, people who use that type of product? And our answer to that question is, if it's a well-established category that consumers are familiar with, then we always recommend using category users as the sample. And we typically want to work with a minimum sample of 200. If it's a really important product category, we may go to a much larger sample. If it's not a well-defined category, then we recommend using a representative sample. But at this point, we typically recommend a very large sample, 500 to 1,000 respondents, if we're going to make a volumetric forecast off of the test. Because we can estimate trial from a relatively small sample, say 200. But when we start talking about estimating repeat purchase rates and frequency of purchase, that's where we need a large base of users or concept acceptors. So we may have to test 1,000 people to end up with 200 or 300 to base our repeat purchase estimates off of. So the concept test is the fundamental step. Regardless of product category, we have to have some type of test to evaluate reactions to the idea of the product, the concept of the product. And then this becomes the template to guide actual product development itself, especially in the CPG world. Now, occasionally somebody will invent something great in the laboratory, and we have to work backwards to build a concept and build a story for the product. But typically in the CPG world, we start with the concept test and then develop the product. And I can't overstate the importance of product testing to make sure that you really do have a good product and one that fulfills and fits the promise of the original concept. Product testing is just absolutely essential. And of course, wise companies will also test the packaging and test the name and test the positioning to reduce risk when the new product is introduced. There are many different ways of estimating sales of new products. I will run through these quickly and give a conceptual overview of 10 different methods. Of course, The most widely practiced method is roll of the dice. Close your eyes and guess, dartboard magic, seat of the pants, pulling numbers from thin air. Guesstimation is alive and well. The vast majority of new CPG products never go through any formal evaluation or forecasting process. So the most expensive and the highest failure method, the roll of the dice, is the most widely practiced forecasting system. I want to before we get into some of the techniques, I really want to talk for a moment about the importance of history. And not history of all companies in general, but the history specifically of your company. This is really, really important. If you're a small manufacturer and you develop a new toothpaste, the sales potential of that product when you introduce it is nothing compared to that same product if it were introduced by Procter & Gamble. So the history of your company, its size, its ability to develop and introduce new products is the biggest single and most important variable in sales forecasting. So ideally, in a perfect world, every company would have a perfect database or a comprehensive database of all the new products ever introduced, along with all of the related data on distribution and trial and repeat purchase. And then that information can be used to fine-tune future estimates or to calibrate estimates. And the kinds of things that we learn from history is how quickly can your company build distribution? What does that curve look like? How fast can your company build awareness? And what does that awareness curve tend to look like relative to media spending? And how quickly can your company generate trial? And how much are they willing to invest in media advertising? We have clients that are great at introducing new products, but we have clients who will never be successful at introducing new products because they're not willing to take the risk, they're not willing to do the investment spending. So there's huge variation from company to company in their ability and their willingness to take risks that are essential in new product success. And how much power do you have to get good shelf position and facings in retail stores? So calibration of any forecast to an individual company is absolutely essential. The first widely used practice forecasting method, no doubt, and the reason I say no doubt is because this is all lost in history at this point, but certainly limited store tests were the first widely practiced method of new product sales forecasting. And maybe they started with 10 to 20 carefully selected stores, and then they would do daily visits and inventory counts and look at the receipts of product deliveries. And by that, they could estimate actual sales at that store. And then forecasting was very easy. You just extrapolate up to the total number of stores. But there are a lot of limitations of store test. One, it's difficult to get into an individual or get into a small number of stores. It's difficult to produce products on that small scale. And it's very easy for a competitor to manipulate that test market. So something better was needed. And we believe that the store test evolved into test markets. And if you think about it, a test market is just a bigger, better store test. But test markets used to be widely practiced and ongoing among the major CPG companies. And typically a set of test markets would be 3 or 4 cities or markets. Typically they were relatively isolated. And one of the great advantages of test markets is that all the variables could be tested. Not only can we test advertising, we can test different spending levels, but we also get to evaluate how can we scale, how well does production scale up in the factory, and what about logistics and shipping? Does the package come apart in shipment or in the dairy case? So that's one of the great advantages of test markets, that all the variables get to be tested. And then test markets are very easy to extrapolate. So if your test markets are 10% of the US or 10% of the UK, you just multiply your results by 10 after you've left it in test market for a year or two, and you have a national forecast. And these forecasts tend to be highly accurate. But there are problems with the traditional test market. It took a year or two to read the results. So test markets typically were and are tracked with ATUs, or awareness, trial, and usage studies. Historically, those were done door to door. They were done via telephone as telephones came into widespread usage. And of course, today we would probably use online, but in the beginning, back in the 60s and 70s, test markets were tracked primarily with door-to-door or telephone surveys. So all of these test markets that lasted for a year or two had good data on awareness, trial, and usage, repeat purchase from these tracking studies. And researchers began to notice that these trial curves and repeat purchase, decay curves, so forth, followed similar patterns. And they began to learn that, if we do these tracking studies fairly short, every 4 weeks or every 6 weeks during the new product's introduction into test market, after we get 10 to 20 weeks of ATU data, and knowing the shapes of these curves, we can forecast what trial is going to be at the end of a year, and forecast what sales are going to be at the end of the year. So now, instead of it taking a year or two to read a test market, the time period was cut down to 4 to 6 months. But the intellectual foundation at this point was laid for the simulated test market. And here's an example of what some of these curves, test market curves, might look like. The top is, you'll hear the term ACV distribution, and that means all commodity volume distribution. So if you say you have 80% distribution, that means your product is available in stores that are visited by, that are doing 80% of the, say, grocery volume. Total brand awareness is a very important metric that's typically tracked in test markets. Trial, extremely important, and then market share. And typically on the market share down at the bottom, you'll see the market share build quickly as trial is building, and then it begins to wane as the repeat purchase begins to kick in and trial decays. So the simulated test market, in effect, was a condensation of the accelerated test market. So the simulated test market, also called laboratory test market, evolved based on projections of trial rates. So this is the classical trial repeat purchase model to forecast sales of new products. And you've all heard of various systems, assessor, bases, conceptor, litmus. These are some of the more widely used systems that you may be aware of. And the simulated test market consists of a concept test plus marketing inputs. How much you're going to spend on advertising, what type of advertising, how many coupons you're going to drop, to try to predict awareness and trial. Then product testing is a component in the simulated test market to help us forecast the repeat purchase rates and frequencies. So the trial volume the trial sales volume in year one plus the repeat sales volume equals total retail depletions, or the total estimate for year one. Let me talk for a second about validation of simulated test markets. There have been many validation studies, but there are none that anyone can trust. There's really no independent verification or independent auditing that I'm aware of on any validation studies of STM. And another big problem is that validation is one-sided. About 10% of new product concepts end up going to market. So on that 10%, what little validation work has been done on the 10% of high-scoring concepts that actually go to market. But 90% of new product concepts tend to be rejected. They never make it to market. So we have no idea how many of those rejected new product concepts would have been successful had they been introduced. So there is a validation issue, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Another relatively easy method of forecasting new product sales is something that we call source of volume estimates. And concept test and product test often contain source of volume questions. So before we expose a respondent to a new product concept, we might ask them a question such as, about how many of each of the following brands of peanut butter will you purchase in the next 3 months? And typically that time period represents 3 purchase cycles. So we ask them what they're going to buy in the future before they see the new concept. And then after they see the new concept, we ask them, okay, now that you know about this new product, what are you going to buy in the next 3 months? So here's an example of a relatively small product category, and we have 4 competitive brands and our new test product. The blue bars represent the before exposure to concept brand share, and the green represents the after exposure to concept brand share. And the net change is the little circle at the top. And you will see under the next to last set of bars that says new product underneath that we have a 30% positive shift in brand share for the new product. Wow, what a big success this is going to be. But wait a minute. We have to start discounting that number because remember, our test is an artificial environment in which we are assuming 100% awareness and 100% distribution. In the real world, we're not going to have 100% awareness or 100% distribution. So we have to discount that 30% estimate of market share by what the real awareness would be. We have to discount it to the expected distribution level. We have to discount it by survey overstatement. And survey overstatement can range from 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, depending on the product category. And then we have to adjust the number by time because remember, all of these sales volumes are building across that first year. And so we have to discount the fact that we're building over time. So if you make those adjustments, the source of volume questions can give you a real quick estimate, a relatively simple estimate, and sometimes it can be fairly accurate. So we end up with a market share based on the source of volume questions that we multiply by the size of the market, and we have an estimate of retail depletions. Another forecasting method that we favor greatly here at Decision Analyst is the standard concept test. That's a given. We always have to have that, combined with choice modeling integrated into the concept test itself. So after going through the standard concept test, the consumer would then go through 8 to 10 choice modeling scenarios. And each scenario is presented visually as a retail shelf set. So it kind of creates a feel of being in the store. And the variations that would be changing from scenario to scenario would be the number of facings, whether we would show and hide different brands. Pricing levels would vary among all of the brands. The position on the shelf would change. The point of purchase tags or signs or messages might change. Packaging might change. The number of different types of packaging might change. So the great advantage of choice modeling is that we can explore hundreds of marketing possibilities, all in the context of the concept test. So we have much better understanding of what variables are driving success or failure, so that when the product actually goes to market, we know better what levers to pull, and that tends to increase the accuracy of the choice modeling approach. But of course, the choice modeling estimates, we still have to discount them for the same variables that we do in the source of volume. We have to discount for distribution levels, awareness, survey overstatement, and time adjustments. One method that's we're very interested in, we've done a lot of experimental work on, is agent-based modeling. Agent-based models can represent competitive markets. You think of a competitive market as like a ecosystem, a competitive ecosystem. Agent behaviors are guided by rules, limits, resource constraints. Artificial intelligence and machine learning can be incorporated into these models. And agent-based models are very good at simulating network behavior. I mentioned ecological systems, simulating competitive markets. Agent-based modeling is used a lot in modeling the diffusion or the spread of disease from agent to agent or person to person. Agent, let's think of an agent from a modeling standpoint as a potential customer or a consumer. So agents are autonomous. Agents interact with other agents. Agents are also interacting with the environment or the marketplace or the ecosystem. And agents are responding or can respond to advertising and promotional stimuli. And agents can learn and adapt as the modeling progresses. So here's a very simple little one or two variable model of perhaps the introduction of a new product. You see it with the red dot, and each dot represents a potential consumer. And then the little graph at the right, and this will run through several hundred iterations. You can't see it, what's going on in the background. But as these models, as each agent follows its rules, you see what happens. And so I'm starting the simulation now. And over to the right, the diffusion of this new product into the marketplace is being charted. So agent-based modeling is a very interesting approach, and it's one that we're very, very interested in for the future and have done a lot of work on. Dr. John Coleus is with me today in the presentation, and he might comment on that in the question and answer session as well. The last forecasting method that I want to touch on is something that we refer to as the normative model. And if you think about, remember back to those curves that we showed earlier of what trial rates look like and what market share looks like. And again, in all of these forecasting methods we've talked about, we're trying to forecast what the market share is going to be. Well, it's a pretty simple task if you think about it, because most new products, are not, a new product is not going to get a 90% market share. It's probably going to get a market share between 5 and 15%. That's where most new products end up. So you have a fairly narrow range, and this is what we're referring to as a normative model. But this relates back to our comments about the importance of history. Because to build a normative model, you have to have that immaculate database of all of your company's new product histories. For example, to build a normative forecasting model, we would identify various variables like advertising spending level. How effective is the commercial? How much promotional spending and how effective is it? And how great is the new package or poor? What is our pricing, competitive or not? And for each of these variables, and we may end up with 15 or 20 variables, I'm only showing you a few here, but for each of these variables, we would say you get plus points or 0 points or negative points, depending on whether you are above average, about average, or below average on each of these variables. Again, this is a very simple model that I'm showing you here. So then here's an example of the history of all of your company's new products introduced in the last 10 years. This is and the dark line in the middle is the average market share of all of the new products your company has introduced. And the upper bound is kind of the most successful new product, and the lower bound are the unsuccessful new products. So the model is very simple. The more points you have above average and the fewer below average, the higher the model moves that average market share up or down within this range of your company's history of new products. And strangely enough, this model can give you a pretty darn good estimate of market share, and it's quite simple and very intuitive. All of the models and methods that we've talked about today are designed to help you estimate what the market share for this new product would be during its first year. Now, there are times we can let that run longer and go, and we can project out through year 2 as well. But it's designed based on a market share estimation model. So where do you get information on what the size of the market is? So the market share that we calculate by all these methods is multiplied by the size of the market to come up with this estimate of retail depletions or year 1 retail sales. So where do we get market sizing information? So it comes from Nielsen, from IRI, it comes from other syndicated data that may be available in your product categories. And in the U.S., there are various governmental data sources that you might be able to use. You can also use survey data to estimate total market size. There's a study called the CES study, Consumer Expenditures Study. published by the U.S. government that has incredible information on a lot of product categories, and sometimes you can use that data to help you estimate overall market size. What is the accuracy of various types of new product sales forecasting methods? If you base a forecast on a concept test only, we think the error range is plus or minus 25 to 30%. And we don't really care who does the test, whether it's us or someone else. That's what we think the error range looks like on average for a concept test only new product sales forecast. If you have the concept test plus a product test, that accuracy range improves quite a bit to the 15 to 20% range, plus or minus. And if you combine the concept test with choice modeling and product testing, we think you improve the accuracy to the 10 to 15% range, partly because you know how to better market the product to make it successful once you introduce it, because of all of the things you learn based on the choice modeling. And then well-designed test markets can be even more accurate, and typically in the 5 to 10% error range. And then there's that unanswered question of the 90% of products where we really don't know how many false negatives we have. And if you take that into account, you would have to expand all of these error ranges by some number. It's an unknown number because the products that don't go to market, we don't know whether they would have been successful or not. So think of these as minimum error ranges. But even so, even with these error ranges, simulated test market forecasting can help reduce a company's cost of new product introductions and help your company get more new products to market faster. One caveat I would like to leave you with, though, if your product is really unique and different, if it's a new car that's radically styled, for example, the more different a new product is, the greater the risk that standard concept testing and simulated test markets are going to underestimate or misestimate the product. So if you've got a really unique product that you really believe in, you may want to put it into a test market and let it stay there for a year or two to see if it catches on as people adapt to this really radically new idea. One final idea, it's really important to use multiple methods when you're forecasting sales of a new product. So if you use two different methods and you come up with estimates that are relatively similar, you can have a lot higher confidence that your results are accurate. So Dr. John Coleus heads up Advanced Analytics at Decision Analyst, and he's here with me today as well. We are open to any questions from participants, and we'll try to answer them at this point.
Yes, Jerry, thanks. There's a couple of questions here we have time for. One is we had a question about the normative models. Don't we run the same risk of forecasting based on only 10% of the new product concepts that actually got launched, for that similar to the simulated test market risk that we have?
Yes, I mean that's a risk of all forecasting methods. And we can't get around that. This is just a very, I never hear anyone talk about this, and it's a really good point, and it certainly is an issue. And that's why I say the types of products that you're most likely to make a mistake on are those that are very different, very unique, very revolutionary, because they're different, and people might tend to negatively react to them at first, but as they learn more about it, then it may become more acceptable over time. But that's a very good point.
One additional question about agent-based models. What types of products would you recommend for use of agent-based modeling for forecasting purposes? And I'll go take a stab at that one. This is good for products with longer purchase cycles, such as durable goods. These are good for products where the type of communication among the agents might use social media, where things could go viral, and we want to understand what are the possibilities for the product actually growing rapidly or dying out, and what are the risks, and we can model those into the agent-based models and understand what to do, and get an accurate forecast for those situations that are a little bit more uncertain. One last question. If you can only do one test due to budget constraints, which one would you do?
Generally, we can use dual methods at no extra cost. As I mentioned, for example, the source of volume question, which is a very simple method, cost virtually nothing to add in. Adding a choice modeling into a concept test is just a relatively small added cost. So it costs very little to use dual methods to forecast, and that's why we recommend that. It doesn't add much to the cost, but it adds a lot to the reliability. And I think it also depends on the product category. For durable goods, choice modeling becomes really, really important as a method, and agent-based modeling is also very recommended for durable goods. The old trial repeat purchase model works really well for consumer packaged goods. So it depends partly on the product category as well.
Okay, well, thank you, Jerry and John, and thank you, everyone, for attending today's Insider Series webinar on volumetric forecasting. If you have any additional questions, feel free to email either Jerry or John. Our next Insider Series webinar will be Wednesday, July 13th. Decision Analyst Clay Deflaw, the Director of Insights and Innovation, will be presenting on qualitative research. We hope you enjoyed today's session and are looking forward to seeing you for next month's webinar. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you very much.